Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of The Lion, the Way, and the War, where we discuss Jesus, His church, and the spiritual battle that surrounds us. My name is Craig Allison, and I'll be your host today. Dr. Chris Willis joins me as our guest today, and I'm interested to see where our conversation takes us. Chris is a person I've known for the past, about the past 10 years, about the past decade. And he's someone who I respect for a lot of different reasons. Maybe we'll get into some of those reasons today. We'll see. He is a professor at Chattanooga State, and he's married to a wonderful woman who I know does her best to keep Chris in line. They have a son who is not too far from being in college himself. So, Chris, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Great. How have you been doing?
Pretty good. I went on spring break and basically never came back this year because of the pandemic. Yeah. Tried to teach online, but the way I teach is a lot of hands-on, a lot of interactive kind of things, and those were very hard to duplicate online. So
I can imagine.
Trying to figure it out for this fall.
So I mentioned your son being close to college because you're in front of college students every day. That's at least up until the virus hit. And I guess the obvious question is talk a little bit more about how the COVID virus has impacted your interaction. Or actually, the better question here is, how do you see what's going on right now impacting this coming fall?
So at Chattanooga State, our plan is to deliver hybrid classes where we normally might meet on Tuesday, Thursday for classroom time. I would meet with half the class on Tuesday and the other half the class on Thursday. And whatever we don't get to would be an online experience of some kind, which for me means my lecture class can adapt pretty easily to that. But my television production class, I'm not sure. I need a team of people to do a TV show in our TV studio. So it's going to be a real challenge. And it's the same for our graphic arts. And everything we do is going to be tough because we've built our programs out there on hands-on learning. So if only get to do that half the time, it's probably only going to be half as good until we figure out how to make it better.
So I know here at UTC, they are having face-to-face classes, but obviously with a lot of implementing of the face masks and limited class size, and then no break going into the Thanksgiving, though they're not going to be coming back, so it's an extended break period. And then I think in the spring semester I don't know that they've even decided to have face-to-face classes at this point. So we're just taking it kind of a day-by-day thing. And so from my standpoint, here's the campus minister, it's definitely impacting us as far as planning and, with our retreats and the different things that we have going on. Our big welcome week, we don't know if that's going to happen. We did orientations during the summer where we get our name out there to incoming freshman students, and obviously none of that is happening. So we're already feeling the impact of it. So it just kind of the transition here as we're speaking about students and the impact of the virus, and from your perspective as a professor, do you see any significant differences in students and their willingness to talk about spiritual things since you've been teaching?
That is an interesting question. I get to have conversations with my students occasionally about spiritual matters, but it's a challenge for me because I don't want to harass people. So if I were to invite, say, my lecture class has 50 students. If I were to invite them to come to my church and 5 of them came, and those 5 students just have to be good students and all make straight A's, that could put me in HR and have a discussion about, are you harassing your students into coming to your church? And I don't ever want to appear that way. So usually what happens, though, is I have students who come hang out in my office and hang out in the hallway or eat lunch together, or they work on projects outside of class with me, like film productions and things. And just driving around or whatever, we'll have those conversations. And those are usually the students I try to mentor more and reach out to. And I find a lot of them are eager to talk about things, like the way they grew up and how they're rebelling against it, or their firm belief in what they've grown up in, whatever it is. I think students are pretty willing to talk about spiritual matters, but I think the context has to be right for that. It's not like I don't want to have those discussions in a big classroom setting when it's just going to upset people.
Yeah, and I probably should have asked this to begin with, as far as us having this discussion here. I'm not putting you in a compromising position to talk about how you interact, share your faith.
Not at all, because I have tenure. So, and it's funny because I disagree with the concept of tenure and people you can still get fired, but not as easily. Yeah. But at the same time, I enjoy knowing, like, hey, I can't talk about, my First Amendment protections are as good as anybody else's, so I should be able to talk about what I believe in. But what's tough for me is sometimes I choose not to, because I don't want to be inappropriate in that way. If people are asking me, I'll open right up, but I don't push that hard on campus. So it's finding the right opportunities for that. More importantly to me, though, is my actions. Like, if I'm not professing my faith to someone, I'd better be doing it through how I treat people. Right. And that's something I hope will lead to those discussions. One
of the things I said, there were several reasons why I respect and admire you. And one of those reasons, you're hitting on it, is I've seen personally your actions in developing relationships where students have a respect and really wanting to see what is it that makes Dr. Willis tick? From the standpoint of them looking up to you, and you're not necessarily pushing it down their throats. You're just you're living the gospel, and So I've seen students that you have had that have taken the opportunity to come and be part of the church that you're at, which you serve as the mission deacon there, and. So I think that speaks a lot to, and maybe you can address this a little bit, that bringing the gospel to other people doesn't always have to be, especially with college students, doesn't always have to be, let's sit down and let's study the Bible, and we're going to open this up and I'm going to show you some things that you need to know. It can be as simple as living out your faith on a daily basis.
Well, I found a big realization for me in teaching was a lot of these kids, I am the first Christ-like person they've been around, or at least it feels that way. Like they're really drawn to somebody who treats them fairly and doesn't look down on them. I know there's somewhat of people have a perspective of community college students being different, but I know there's a lot of kids here at UTC and a whole lot of kids at Chattanooga State who just have kind of broken lives, like a lot of things they've struggled with, and have never really had anybody love them unconditionally and where they're at. So it's awesome to be able to be that person, and it weighs over me though. Like, I really need to, get them here, get them involved in church and things that'll continue to lift them up spiritually, but it's hard to do that. It feels good to be able to just to listen to people's problems, and it's even made me want to go back for like counseling and some other things, because I end up in those roles. I don't think I'm always the perfect person for people to be talking to, but I want to be there for them and try to refer them. Like, hey, we have great counselors on our campus. We have people who can help you with this, and you need to do that. You need to do that for you to be successful. So I really enjoy being able to mentor people, but sometimes it really weighs on me. And these last few years, I've really taken a lot of time for self-care and finding hobbies that, keep me going. So that's an important part of it.
You've had different activities at your house, some of which I've been to, and it's always been impressive to me to see that you've opened your home to, you talk about some of these kids that are just, and they've got needs that have not been addressed, and they have no good Christian role models in their life. They've never had that, and there's a need there for that. And so, I think that what you're saying speaks to a huge hole in specifically this college age group that, they're hungry for it. They're hungry to have that type of influence in their life, whether they realize it or not. So I want to sort of shift gears here for just a moment and talk about, because we're getting into like some like relational types of things, and I'm interested to know how you juggle building relationships as, first of all as their professor, as their teacher, but you see this need, you see a hole in their life that needs to be filled, and you have the answer who is going to fill that role as far as, they need Christ in their life. So how is it that you go about addressing or bridging that gap where you can appropriately develop a relationship with a student that's not going to put you in an awkward situation with the school?
What weighs on me is all the missed opportunities. Like, there's a lot of times of like, maybe I should have pushed harder for that student to come to church or to, get into a Bible study or something. But for the ones I have, it's really been trying to just steer them. Like, if I'm guest speaking at the CSC or at Central, I get a chance to like, hey, I'm doing this thing, and it's a little easier for me to invite people to that than it would be just our normal service or whatever. I should work harder on getting more people down here, because this would be such a huge influence on so many kids' lives. But it's tough, and really, I try to listen to people and to invest in their lives, and then hopefully when they reciprocate, they'll want to listen to me and hear what I have to say. But it's a lot of just trusting God to work. Like, I don't have a goal of I'm going to talk to this many kids about Jesus this year. Yeah. I'm just going to be who I am, and hopefully God will open those doors and continue to water the seeds that have been planted.
Yeah. As a Christian professor in a secular school setting, what are some of the biggest challenges you face?
So it's interesting. I feel like there's definitely a concern nationwide about college campuses being liberal. I'm not sure if that's what you're talking about here yet or not, but that people are trying to push a certain mindset on students, and there's certainly college is a very turbulent time for young people, and it's when they're really figuring out who they are and what they believe. And I think honestly they're going to react and rebel against things they were thinking growing up, or maybe just starting thinking about for the first time, and they're going to change again afterward. Mm-hmm. So I feel like some of the concern about liberal campuses or whatever the concerns are overblown. Mm-hmm. Like, if kids are going to have one psychology teacher who blows their mind with some thoughts about gender or whatever, then, maybe they weren't that strong in whatever their beliefs were before. Yeah. And I don't think it hurts for people to stretch their minds. I also think it's departmental on campuses. Like, if you're in an econ department here, or business, like we have a very strong free market business school here at UTC. And so I'm not as concerned about that. And a lot of us stand by our beliefs. Like, I will talk about in my lecture class, like the church I attend and the mission trip I went on, or the opportunities to work with people in the inner city or whatever it was through my church. So I feel very confident about not having academic freedom to speak about my experience if it relates to the course.
Yeah, and I guess, I read all of these articles about Christian professors, and maybe it's a geographical thing too, where you have way more pushback from college administrators that are very I'd say liberal minded. In the Northeast, out in Berkeley, mm-hmm. California, some of these places, and I'm curious to know, maybe here in the South, we might not be, or say you may not be getting that type of pushback that you might in another setting, especially, I see students complaining about a lot of different things, and even here I've heard of instances where you have an atheist student in class, and the professor just barely scoots their foot into this arena of their Christian faith, and the next thing they know, they're getting a call from administration because that student has gone and complained. about it. But you haven't experienced anything
I haven't
like
experienced it, and I always wonder, like, how was the instructor speaking about their faith? Like, were they at all condescending to atheists or anything? Because it really, everything we say is judged by the perception somebody has of what you're saying and how you come across. So I worry that some people might be pushy with their faith, and people don't respond to that.
Yeah.
At the same time, I think some people will. I was actually complimented once years ago for somebody said, "Well, you're really Christ-like, but you're not pushy about it." It's like, well, Christ was. Like, Jesus was kind of pushy about issues. He wasn't quiet and kind of behind the scenes. He was out there, and I actually took that as a challenge to try to present my faith more, and it's that weird balancing act. I think you're definitely right about geographically, things are going to be different. So I want to take advantage of the academic freedom we have here to speak, to be who we are. And I want students to do the same thing. If a student's an atheist or whatever they are, I want them to be who they are and feel comfortable around me and not ever feel judged, especially prejudged. Like, I want them to be who they are, and I want to be able to have those conversations without any of that filter of who am I versus who are you. Just be yourself.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where, when I start to think about these things, the lack of, and maybe my perception is wrong here, but it's the lack of open dialogue that seems to me, again, this is my perception on this, which is very limited in scope, but it seems to me, based on everything I read and everything I hear on the news and different outlets, that the basic conservative Christian, I'll call it agenda, is really being targeted and pushed out. And if you, it's tolerated. Things are tolerated, and there's a forbearance of tolerance given out as long as it is part of a liberal mindset. But as long as you step outside of that mindset, then you become a target of intolerance from the left. And I'm talking spiritual matters here. I'm not necessarily talking political. I'm talking, faith-based things, basic Christian morality, and so this was one of the things I was really interested in getting your perception on. If you think that this is an issue not necessarily isolated here to Chattanooga State, but from a national perspective, if you see the educational system moving further and further and further to a leftist.
Well, two things. One, like, I am a conservative Christian, in that I, am a fundamentalist about the Bible as our source of authority and how we should live. But I'm not big on this left versus right culture war. I'm not up in arms about the way our country's going. Sometimes Christians bother me who are worrywarts about everything going on that they read. And sometimes the things they share and post, I'm like, you realize we're on the winning side of this. Like, why are you worried about all these little things? And why are you spending that energy on all these big movements that we have so little influence over when you could be helping individual people come to Jesus? I don't remember Jesus ever saying we should wage war on our culture and have this awesome United States of America that, is founded on Christian principles. He said, go and baptize, like, go and make disciples. And I feel like we're getting off track when we really get too concerned about. Now, having that said, back when I was working here at UTC as staff, I taught as adjunct, and I sat in a meeting with a couple professors one time. They told me that it was their job to take out all the things that mommy and daddy had planted into their students' head and replace it. That was their job as an instructor. And we were having this discussion. There was actually an act in the 2000s about academic freedom to protect basically conservative professors back then. And I said, I don't agree with that at all. Like, I'm here to teach what I teach. And I tell my students now, I don't care what you think. I just want you to think. Like, that is my challenge as a teacher, to get you to think, hopefully, about the things we're discussing in class. But even in general, just to think more deeply about what's going on in the world. And that bothered me that they said that. But at the same time, people need to be ready for that. People need to challenge their thinking. People need to get outside their box of what they grew up thinking and realize, do I believe in this? Is this my own faith? Or is it something I've just kind of been around? Because that's what happened for me. My dad's a preacher. I went Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, to even on vacation, everywhere was involved in church.
Right.
But then I was here at the CSC in my college years, and I realized I had no faith of my own. And I started reading the Bible for the first time at 20 years old and realizing this is something I'm missing and I need to have it. And I want that for other people. I want that for my son. I want him to have his own faith that is not something I pushed on him, but that he came to Jesus Christ through the scripture and accepted it all on his own. So.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the CSC and the impact it had in your life, because I'm keenly interested, because as my job here dealing with the students that are coming into this place, trying to really kind of do what you've been talking about is to have a place where different opinions are. We don't run and hide if somebody comes in here as an atheist or be just totally like, oh, I reject you because you don't believe the same way I do. I encourage the open dialogue, and even amongst the different doctrinal differences that Christians themselves have. Well, let's talk about these things like women's roles in the church, and musical instruments in worship. So these things that divide the church, I encourage these open dialogues. So you mentioned, you showed up here, you hadn't really dove into the Word, and probably you were riding the coattails of your parents' faith. It wasn't really your own. What happened? Like, how did that come about?
Well, first of all, I was not in a positive spiritual mindset coming out of high school, and really had no other intent than to get an apartment and be the base camp for all my friends to party with. And my dad, they were moving away the week I started college. My dad said, you need to check down at the Christian Student Center. They have some free places to stay. And I begrudgingly checked in down here, and Chuck Kilpatrick said, yep, we just had a guy move out and we really need somebody, and you can move in this week. And that flipped all of my plans.
And your motives were completely pure.
Yeah.
Coming in, right?
I begrudgingly took a free apartment.
Yeah.
And it's funny looking back on how many ways the Lord has intervened in my life, and I can't imagine where I'd be if I hadn't come here. Just such a radical difference in my life, and so many, everybody I know who's been through here has had just a massive impact on them. So you talked about the Student Center being a place where we don't have the stigma of being a church. You can come here with, it just says Christian Student Center.
Right.
So anybody who's interested in that, and even if they're not, you get them here and they enjoy being around people who love each other. You get those opportunities to have those discussions, and I think it's phenomenal. And sometimes I hate that the way we do church in America and around the world is off-putting to people. Like, I'm not going to get somebody to walk through those doors, but I can get them down here for a meal or other activities. And we need to figure out, as a church, how do we get out of that box? Because it's not helping. It's hard to invite people to church. Why would they want to come to church sometimes? And that sounds negative, but it's just, I don't want our interpretation of church to get in the way of Jesus. So I really want to have a relationship with somebody and to mentor, to have some positive impact on them. Then see if this is something we can get them involved in. So you have so many opportunities for that here. I wanted to tell you too, Chuck Kilpatrick provided so many opportunities here as a campus minister to get involved and just mentored that to us. He and his wife were so hospitable and opening up their home. And I wanted to say, you guys, you and Betsy have done amazing. Like, the things I hear about of having kids live with you for months at a time, and it's just awesome the work you're doing here. And thank you. It's an answered prayer. Whenever there's a new preacher or a new campus minister, it's such a hope we get the right guy.
Yeah.
You've really done great work here. So,
well, thank you. I appreciate that.
And people, it affects lives. It sets a tone of, am I going to be a Christian who just goes Sunday morning and checks in, or am I going to be involved in serving the Lord every day? And this place is helping people learn to serve the Lord every day.
I want to talk to you for a minute about the relationships, because you mentioned, you can get them in these doors, but getting them into the church doors, the way that America does church is off-putting. And I think that is something really critical that we need to have more conversations. Church leadership needs to have more conversations, because and I'm going to throw all churches under the bus here. I'm going to be an equal opportunity offender, if you will, because I think it's across the board that we have such this rigid way of doing church. And I'm not, and I don't want anybody listening to this to misunderstand my words here, because the corporate worship, I think is a very holy thing, and I think that there's ways that God has through His Word said this is how He wants to be worshipped, and I don't think that's a recipe that we should go in and just completely toss out and mess around with. But there's this other aspect that is the other side of church, which is all the stuff that happens when we're not meeting in that corporate setting, because that corporate setting should be the pinnacle of everything that we've done during the week in building the relationships, because it makes it a lot more special when you come together and you have that corporate kind of more rigid mindset. But a lot of the things that we do there begin to make a lot more sense and become way more meaningful if what's been taking place outside of that Sunday worship has been a reflection of what was taking place in Acts chapter 2. And that's what I'm trying to say here, is that's where I see churches across the board really taking the easy road, not putting the work, not putting the effort, not being intentional about building the relationships. This is one of the things, when I talked about at the beginning of this podcast, the things I respect about you, I see you doing that. And I have, coming in and, patterned a lot of the things I do based on your example of building these relationships with these kids and really being genuine with them and opening up your home and having this mindset that, I may not agree with this student or the way that they've been raised. They may have a completely different viewpoint of the world than I do, but I'm going to do my best to love them like Jesus loved them, and I'm going to be whatever I can be to this person. Mm-hmm. And that's where we begin to build these relationships that now a kid's ready to listen to you. When you say, hey, why don't you come to this event at the Student Center? Why don't you come to this event that we're having at church?
So the way churches function, it's somehow limiting for us on who we feel comfortable inviting to that. Like if we invite a homeless person there, are they going to feel comfortable with people wearing suits Sunday morning? Yeah. Or if we invite somebody who has different political beliefs, are they going to hear something that's going to set them off and send them running away? And we're not talking about those things. We're kind of sticking to this pattern of let's just find more people like us and try to get them here.
Yeah.
I want to do the opposite. I want to find people different from me. And it's a really awesome opportunity I have of working at a community college, being at a state school, and being involved in the community. And I get to meet people who are way different from me. And I love it. Like, I love genuinely being around people who are different from me. I think that's probably why I've wanted to do missions. Like, there's nothing more different than India to what we're doing here in America. And I love those people. I love seeing that no matter how different we are, Jesus Christ can unite us. And sometimes we don't have that attitude here of like, well, they're probably not going to want to do this because, they have this view on abortion or this idea about they're in those protests, so they're not going to want to come to church. Like, you don't know that. Yeah. Jesus would never say that. Yeah. Get out of this mindset of people have to all be the same from the get-go. We're really better off reaching out to people who are much different from us, and that's something we need to talk about as a church. How are we getting outside of this square box of a building and getting into our community? And it just takes some effort of, I'm going to talk to so-and-so more. I'm going to spend some time with them doing the things they want to do. And then, they'll owe me. They'll come to hear me talk one time. And maybe that leads to something, maybe it doesn't.
Yeah, and that kind of the lead in or the follow up question is, so how do you think as a church we begin to do that better?
I think we need to talk about it more as a congregation. A lot of times we repeat the doctrine and the things we believe in so much that it's really ingrained, but we don't talk about how to apply it to the world of, there's people out there hungry for Jesus, and we're not comfortable talking to them about it. Mm-hmm. So I think we need to just plan, get our plans together. So we do things like we have the giveaway at Central. We have some other opportunities to reach out to people. How do we get beyond that? How do we get to some people with different viewpoints? How do we show our support in the community? What's going on right now with protests every night for 3 weeks about police brutality? I feel like the church needs to respond to these kind of things going on out there. It gets into people's political stances, and it shouldn't, because it's scriptural that we stand up against oppression and we support justice and what's right. Yeah. So I feel like we as a church need to take some risks. And if people don't like that, hey, we want to support our police, but we also want to see justice done to people who've abused their power. Let's talk about things going on in the world, because young people care about that. Young people want to hear somebody speak up about important issues, and it's high time we did it.
Yeah, you said that, and I was just sitting here thinking about a lot of the. I left here pretty late the other day and had a hard time getting out because there was a lot of marches, and I looked and watched the ages. These were all young kids. There weren't a whole lot of older people there, so they have a passion, and I'm not going to sit here and because we know there's a lot of them in there that are stirring things up and just trying to create other issues where there shouldn't be. But I think you do have a lot of young people that are genuinely concerned about the injustice that's going on, and hoping finally to make some changes that a lot of people have been blind to and just accepted for a long time. But that's just the way it is.
And that's an opportunity. It was really interesting when everybody was making their Instagram profiles black or whatever, those kind of things. And I'm like, do I do this? Do I not? I'm not big on the protesting, making the big impact. For me, I want to make an impact with every African-American student I have. I want to encourage every female student I have who's, got the interest to go for it in the film industry or something where that's been historically dominated by white men. But so I want to make a difference one-on-one with people, but I do want to talk to kids about, the Bible addresses this. It's all through the Old Testament about treating people fairly. Let's discuss the biblical side of those things. And some people aren't going to like the politics that involves, but that's life. Life, a true Christian should be able to have some discussions that are uncomfortable. And I think if we're not having those discussions, if we're comfortable with everything we're talking about with people, then we're not putting ourselves out there with our faith.
Yeah. I'm going to switch gears just a little bit because I want to get your take on this. One of the things that I've seen, and not necessarily the students here coming to the Christian Student Center, but just generally speaking in broad terms, there is a kind of this sense of entitlement. And I think that has a lot to do with the way that kids have been raised, and a shift in thinking from a social standpoint. And parents, I'd say probably in that age category where they're just now having kids that are entering the college, going back maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 years, entering into the college scene. For the first time, we're getting a mass group of kids that, if I'm reading the sociologist and some of the things that have been, the demographics, this is a generation of kids who who have truly known the helicopter parents, and just been put on such a pedestal of, you can do no wrong, and whatever you want, I'm going to provide it for you because I want you to have a better life than I did growing up, and this just a sense of entitlement coming in, and a lack of gratitude, a lack of being able to pull back out of yourself and say, you know what, I'm blessed because I'm getting a lot of stuff that I didn't earn, that I didn't really deserve, but my parents gave it to me anyway. And that really seems to be getting in the way of having some deep, meaningful conversations about spirituality with kids, because at the bottom of this, and our Devo last night kind of focused on this, is that if you are ungrateful, that's a pride thing. It's an ego thing, and you can't really come to grips with an all-powerful God that has sacrificed His Son for you. So can you address that?
So it's interesting in terms of gratitude. It's people who've grown up with everything handed to them are ungrateful because they've had a lot, and people who had a little have sometimes got government checks coming and all that kind of stuff. So they also are ungrateful because they've had a handout. So there's definitely something to be said there about this generation. But I see extremes. Like I see students who think everything I do is great. They've always been told that I deserve an A. I deserve 100 points, not just an A. I actually had a grievance meeting with a student one time complaining about his grade from another instructor. And I was like, well, tell me what happened and what grade you got on that one test. I was like, what's your overall grade? And he said 97 out of 100. I was like, get out of my office. Like, I don't have time in my day for, like, I thought you had like a D or a C or a D or an F. I'm not here to discuss like all those little extra points. But there's those students who want all the points. And then there's students who think, I can't do anything right. I don't really belong here. I'm just here because somebody thinks I ought to be, and they have no self-confidence. And really, those kids are so grateful when they realize, oh, you tell them, they did good on this one thing, even if it was C work, but it's the best C work they've ever done. Mm-hmm. It's awesome to see them respond to, hey, I can do something. I have value. So I see those two extremes, and it's a lot harder to work with the grade grubbers. They drive me crazy. They'll email me all the time wanting this and that and the other, and I'm like, look, you're doing fine. Like, just keep it up. But if you are so focused on the end result that you're not enjoying this process, I'm more worried about that. Like, I want us to get something out of this class together. Another thing you mentioned, I think, is, I guess, not being respectful. I feel like that's something different about this generation, is there's definitely not a lot of respect for positional authority, like if you're the dean or whatever, right. Or for police or in other aspects of our society. And I don't know that I disagree with it, though, because I have always thought and was raised to think that we should earn our respect, and that people in positional authority positions should earn their respect as well. So that's something I try to live by, is I don't want, like you introduced me as Dr. Willis. I have never told anybody to call me that ever. If anything, I've told people you don't have to do that. Whereas I've got some colleagues who are like, the secretary doesn't call me doctor, and I think they should. Like, well, why? Why do you care about that? And the fact that you're saying that is going to make them want to do it less. So just, I want to earn the respect of my students by the things they see me doing and the things they hear me saying. And if I can't get that respect from me earning it, I don't want it. On the other hand, I want to treat everyone with respect. Like, I want to respect the custodian in my building as much as the dean or the president of our campus. Like, everybody on earth is a child of God and deserves to be treated like that. There's no reason for anybody ever to demean anyone else for their beliefs or who they are. And I think that's something we can do by showing respect to others to earn their respect.
Yeah, that's an issue of, I think, the word bigotry. It's to have that respect for everybody, regardless of age, gender, race, job. And that's a model that Christ set as an example for us. So I think that those are excellent points. I'm always looking at leading indicators because I want to adjust maybe the way that I present things or deal or form relationships with students. And I feel like here I get kind of a microcosm of certain students. I may not see the bigger picture that you see as a college professor because you're getting all of them. And so I do have variety here, but not on the scale that I think you see it.
Well, sometimes I'm very jealous of the students you work with. Like when I'm dealing with like people with probation officers and all these other things, like really tough situations, and I'm like, man, if I could just go sing with those kids downtown, it would be so uplifting. Yeah. So you have an awesome group of people here.
I do. I mean, I get the outliers from time to time, but by and large, it's a good group of students that they're here for a reason. You don't come through the Christian Student Center unless you have an interest in things. And obviously we serve free food, so we we get that as well. But I'm interested in this idea because what's coming down the pike. 10 years from now, we're talking about this growing sense of maybe these kids that have this entitled type of attitude. How do we, as a church, as a campus ministry, as a professor, that is leading and living your Christian faith, how do we prepare to deal with something like that? And so, as a leading indicator, is that something that you see from a broader, more of a macro viewpoint? Does it seem to be getting worse? Is it the same? What direction is it going overall in the past, say, 10 years?
Well, I definitely think people are getting more isolated into smaller groups, which is interesting because with all the technology that we have to communicate and see the world and learn, and we tend to just find people who like the same things or think the same things. And a big push we have on our campus is global awareness, trying to get people to experience other cultures and find out about other people. We have a lot of students who haven't left the state of Tennessee, haven't left the community that they live in, that the part of town, except to come to our campus. Like that is a big deal for them. And we want to expand their horizons. And I really think that's what all of us need. Like if we don't talk to people who are different from us, we're going to tend to always think the same things. One of the things that I think is great is short-term missions. And a lot of people talk about the effectiveness of, does it really do much in terms of the mission point? But it does a lot for the people who go. And if you don't ever see kids raised in another country walking around barefoot, you're always going to think everybody in the world has shoes. And it's not true. So it's really important to me that we support going out into the world and experiencing people the way Jesus did. He walked around and talked to people, and that's what we got to get more involved doing. Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100%. Chris, thank you for joining me today. As always, for those of you that are listening, if you find any of this beneficial, give us feedback, like it, share it. Don't be afraid to talk to somebody about your faith, develop a relationship with them, share the gospel with them when the time is right. Tell them why that you have hope and joy and excitement in a world where we're dealing with the divisiveness and the judgmental attitudes and all of the things that we have in a broken world. Because I think that's worth sharing, and I think if anything else, that's worth working and being intentional in developing a relationship with people so they can hear your story. Final thoughts, Psalms chapter 28, verse 7. The Lord is my strength and my shield, in Him my heart trusts, and I am helped. My heart exalts, and with my song I give thanks to Him. You all have a blessed week. Until next time, this is Craig Allison for The Line, The Way, and The War.